Now, the Prime Minister faces an insurgency over Europe, both inside the Conservative Party and from UKIP. The real question for millions of voters is whether they can trust David Cameron to negotiate a transformed relationship within the EU and give Britain a referendum. What exactly are his demands? Are they realistic? And is this, as he says, one last chance for our European future? Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Let's talk largely, if you don't mind today, about Europe, since it is the big issue in front of people's minds at the moment. First of all, can you give me a cast-iron guarantee that a David Cameron-led government will give Britain an in-out referendum within 2 years?
Yes, absolutely. We will hold that referendum by the end of 2017. It will be a referendum on an in-out basis. Do we stay in a reformed European Union or do we leave? And I've said very clearly that whatever the outcome of the next election, and of course I want an overall majority and I'm hoping and believing I can win an overall majority, but people should be in no doubt I will not become Prime Minister unless I can guarantee that we will hold that referendum.
Well, that's very interesting, because if, for instance, the Conservatives were the largest party with a minority, that suggests you would not then be Prime Minister, because you couldn't guarantee that referendum if you didn't have a majority of House of Commons seats.
I couldn't answer the question more clearly. I won't become Prime Minister unless I can guarantee that that in-out referendum will be held. And there's a good reason for this.
David Cameron won't lead a minority Conservative government after the next election.
I've answered the question. There's a very good reason for this, which is the British public, you know, have not had a say since 1975, and yet we've had the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, the Nice Treaty, the Amsterdam Treaty. You cannot hold people in an organisation against their will, and it's right to have this renegotiation, to have this referendum, and to let the people have their say. I think it's right, though, to have the renegotiation first. There are changes we can make to this organisation to improve it and improve our membership of it. And I think that's what's striking about these European elections, is there is only one party that actually has a plan to change Europe and allow people to have a say.
And it's not UKIP. OK.
Well, UKIP can't give you a referendum. Labour and the Liberal Democrats don't want to give you a referendum. It's only the Conservatives that can and will give you
now,
a referendum.
You know this organisation, as you described, the EU, very well. You know how negotiations can drag on and drag on and drag on. You're not going to be sucked into a position where you come back in 2017 and say, I know I promised you a referendum, but we're not there yet. You're going to have to wait for another year.
We have the referendum, whether or not I have successfully negotiated. Now, I believe I will be successful, and for a couple of very good reasons. First of all, others in Europe need change to the European Union. The Eurozone, the euro currency, needs change because it needs a banking union, it needs more fiscal union. And so we're perfectly legitimate to ask for our changes. And you've already seen other leaders in Europe, including, for instance, Chancellor Merkel in Germany, not rejecting out of hand what Britain is saying, but saying, yes, we can discuss these issues and let's see what we can do. So I think the reception from European leaders for what I've said, also the reception amongst business leaders, many of whom are very keen we stay in a reformed Europe, has been very positive. And
looking ahead in your forward diary, kind of Smithson diary, I hope, have you got a date in 2017 when you hope that referendum will take place? Do you know when it's going to happen?
I haven't, but it will be before the end of 2017.
So sometime in the autumn of 2017?
It could be. I think the negotiation, as I say, that I'm aiming to undertake will be successful. We're very clear about what we want to achieve. Let's end benefit tourism in Europe.
Excellent.
Let's make sure that the single market is properly safeguarded. Let's make sure that parliaments can get together and block unwelcome proposals from the European Commission. Let's make a series of changes to make Europe more flexible, more competitive. These are the sorts of things that I want to see. I've set them out in a number of different places. We achieve those negotiation changes. Perhaps the most important is getting Britain out of the clause that says the European Union must be committed to an ever closer union. I don't accept that. I don't think the British people
I really want to come back to
accepted
this in just a second, but I want to be very clear that if you have this negotiation and you don't get what you want, you will lead your party into that referendum saying we have to leave Europe. It's no longer worth it. Well, you won't sit on the fence.
No, I'm confident that I will achieve the objectives I've set out. And I think the right way to go into a negotiation is with confidence and a positive nature that you can get those changes. And I want to see Britain stay in a reformed European Union.
But we're not going to have a referendum where David Cameron is washing his hands about the result.
No, we'll have a referendum where I'll be recommending, look, I've got these changes. I believe we should stay in this reformed organisation.
I haven't got these changes because you can't be sure. You can't know.
I'm confident. But look, I'm someone who has a very positive, optimistic plan for this country. We have turned around and are turning around Britain's economy. We've got 1.5 million more people in work. We've cut our deficit. Britain is growing faster than any other G7 country this year, faster even than America. We've shown we can make changes, and I'm tremendously upbeat, bullish and optimistic about what Britain can achieve in terms of our economy and also about our place in Europe. We have a plan, and I think that is the most important thing in politics, is to show to people you have a clear plan for the economy, for our country, for our future, for our living standards. That is what we're going to do.
One last, very gentle, very polite go. In that referendum, you will tell people to vote yes or no. You won't sit on the fence.
No, of course I won't sit on the fence.
OK. Will the Cabinet have a free vote, can I ask, in the Conservative Party?
The whole of my government, well, the Conservative half of my government, more than half, the Conservatives in government are all committed to this plan for a renegotiation and a referendum, and we are all convinced that it is possible to achieve these changes. We're going for those changes and we'll act on that basis.
Let's talk about those changes then. You mentioned right at the beginning the importance of getting out of the clause about an ever closer union, which of course in the Treaty of Rome says of peoples. It doesn't say an ever closer union of parliaments or governments. That is the original founding Treaty of Rome which created the whole thing. Do you really think that you can rip that up and start again? Do you think your colleagues in the European Union will allow that to happen?
Well, I think it's essential that that doesn't apply to Britain, that the treaties make clear it doesn't apply to Britain. Because I think if you go back, this
so you
is
could
part
have an
of
addendum to the Treaty of Rome saying this clause no longer applies to Britain.
Some of the things I'm calling for will require treaty change, and
that
is one of them. And I think why this is so important is there is a sense in our country, which I understand and in many ways share, that we wanted to be part of a single market, we wanted to be part of a organisation where nation states cooperate. We did not want to be part of a country called Europe. Our country is
I understand that,
the United Kingdom. And so I think it's not just symbolic, because actually the concept of ever closer union informs so much of what the European Union does.
That magnetic pull to the centre.
But again, this is a very optimistic outlook, because UKIP are saying, put up the barriers, we can't succeed and compete in the modern world, let's give up on Europe altogether. Labour and the Liberals seem to me basically to be saying there's not really anything wrong with Europe. We are the only party, and I'm the only person with a very clear...
your views
more. Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I want a very clear plan for how to sort this out.
You also mentioned an end to benefit tourism. Now, the EU has more or less accepted a 3-month moratorium on people coming into this country before they can claim benefits. Organisations like Migration Watch have said, no, 5 years before people can claim benefits if they're coming to this country. Is that the kind of thing, in concrete terms, that you want when you say, I want an end to benefit tourism?
I think there are two parts to this. One is we need to make sure that the freedom to move to work is about that. It's to go and get a job, not to claim. And so I would like to see longer periods in terms of before you're allowed to claim any benefits.
How much?
But let's look at what is possible, but certainly longer than what we have today.
Several years?
Well, longer than what we have today. But there's another very important element to this, which is today, if you travel and work from another European country into Britain, you can then claim child benefit and other benefits for your family back at home, even though actually they're not living in the UK and going to UK schools and all the rest of it. And under the current rules, it seems extremely difficult, if not impossible, to change that. Now, I haven't met anybody who thinks that it's sensible. So that is again, a really big change.
But on the general principle of the free movement of people, Nigel Farage talking about 400 million people could come here after your job and all the rest of it, you have no proposals to end the free movement of people.
No, I think free movement within the European Union is important, but it needs to be returned to the original concept, which was the freedom to be able to go and work in another country. Now, many British citizens go and work in other European countries. Other European citizens come to work here. Freedom to apply for a job to go and work in another country. That is one thing, but I think what we've seen recently is something else.
So free movement of people would stay after the referendum in the way that you've described it. Let me turn to something else, which is related to that, which is the expansion of the EU, because the borders are always moving east. And Britain has been among the countries, for instance, supporting the accession of Turkey to the EU. Now, you want longer transitional controls, but as the name suggests, they are just transitional controls. So David Cameron could negotiate this deal successfully, have a successful referendum, and then a few years down the line, we could have everybody currently working in Turkey free to come and work here.
Well, I've argued very clearly that we need longer transitional controls, and possibly transitional controls agreed on a totally different basis. You get these big migratory flows when you have countries with very different levels of income. So the massive move that there was from Poland and the other countries that joined
and
in 2004,
Bulgaria and Romania,
was based on the fact that the income levels were so different. So you could have transitional controls that say, for instance, you don't have the freedom to move and get a job in another country until, say, your level of income per capita is at a certain level. Now, that would be a way of avoiding some of the difficulties we've had in the past. Again,
do you think that's sellable?
Yes, I think it is, because all future accessions, new countries joining the European Union, they have to be agreed by unanimity. So you have a bloc, you have a very clear say about that issue. And again, I think quite rightly responding to what has happened in Europe in recent years. The fact that after 2004, about 1 million people moved from parts of Eastern Europe to Britain, I think net now about 700,000. That has changed our country, it's changed our political culture, and it's right that politicians and prime ministers, I think a lot of the people who've come have contributed a huge amount in terms of working in our economy. But I think it's absolutely right to grip this issue and have a plan for sorting it out. Let me make one last point, because I think, again, this is something that the Conservatives and I totally understand, and I think the other parties are forgetting. Immigration policy is meaningless on its own. It's got to be accompanied by welfare reform, so it pays for people in our own country to work rather than not to work, and it's got to be accompanied by very robust educational reform, so actually we're producing from our schools and colleges people who've got all of the skills necessary to compete in today's world. And what you can see with this government is a long-term economic plan that includes schools and skills being the best in Europe for our young people, and also a welfare revolution, in fact,
which is much tougher.
Well, it is. I mean, it already is. We are seeing. Some people would say tough, but actually there's a very compassionate side to it. We're seeing at the moment around 100 people every week coming off benefits and into work simply because of the welfare cap. Because the welfare cap is working in terms of encouraging people to go out to work and to help provide stability and security.
I'd love to talk about welfare, but today I want to try and concentrate on Europe, if you don't mind. There's two other things that I remember from your list. One I thought was just a complete straw man. You said you don't want Britain to be forced to join the euro. After the Maastricht Treaty, there is no way that Britain's going to be forced to join the euro. That is a straw man, isn't it?
Well, you don't. I mean,
good rhetorical position.
I sit in these European Council meetings with my 27 fellow heads of state and government, and I've lost count of the times that it is stated by one or other member, or indeed by the European Commission, that the euro is the currency of the European Union. And I keep saying, it is for some of you, it isn't for some of us, and Britain, if I'm Prime Minister, will never join the euro. We should keep the pound as our currency. It gives us flexibility. It's in our national interest. And I think it's really important, as the eurozone changes and has new rules and regulations and the rest of it, we absolutely make clear that you can be a full member of the European Union with all of your rights, but not in the eurozone, and the single market needs to be properly protected. So this is actually, again, not a straw man, very important.
What about Britain's contributions? You said you want them to come down. They're 9 billion a year, roughly speaking. But you've done a deal until 2020. You're not going to try and unpick that, are you?
No, we've done an excellent deal. And again, when people say to me, are you confident you can get these changes? I say, look, people said you'd never cut the budget. I cut it by £8 billion for British taxpayers. People said you'll never get powers back from Europe. I've got us out of those Eurozone bailout funds. People said, oh, you'll never really veto a treaty. I did veto a treaty. So people can see a track record of getting change in Europe. I just want to make sure
beyond the track record, what are the red lines on contributions? Where do you intend to get to?
Well, we want to embed and pass this budget deal that was agreed. Interestingly, UKIP MPs in the European Parliament voted against it, and it is important for people to understand, of course, elections are an opportunity to register a message or a protest, but we are looking at sending men and women to the European Parliament to stand up for this country, and that's why I want people to send Conservatives there. Now, but I want to make sure that
you mentioned a new parliamentary veto, so I'm running through the list.
Sure.
A new parliamentary veto, that would apply to all parliaments able to veto any European Commission proposals?
What this is what's known as the red card system, where European national parliaments can club together and say about a particular new proposal, we don't want that.
So the British Parliament still have to get support from the Bundestag or the French Parliament or whatever, the National Assembly?
National parliaments working together and we'll have to work out the exact numbers that will be required in order to block new proposals. To
Is
change the balance
is
of
there
power in Europe.
anything major from what we've talked about that is missing? Is there anything else on your agenda for these negotiations?
Well, I think there are other things like, for instance, the Working Time Directive, where we have managed to stop some of the worst parts of it, but it's still an area which I think needs extra safeguards and extra work. So there are things like that as well.
A lot of European colleagues will say, well, why should there be an even playing field on these kind of matters? You know, this is meant to be an even playing field inside the EU. The Working Time Directive is part of that. You can unpick this, you can unpick that, but this is going too far.
Well, I think for two good reasons. First of all, as I've said, the Eurozone countries, they need change. And Britain is happy to agree to that change as long as we can make these broader changes to the European Union as well. And the second reason is that Britain does actually bring a huge amount to the European Union. We are a big free trading economy with links all over the world. When we're discussing whether it's the Ukraine or the future of Burma, Britain has got great interest, great strength, great power that it brings to those discussions. So I think that people recognise, as Barroso said last week, that Britain does have some special cases that it wants to bring to the table.
I think there'll be a lot of people watching this who will say, yes, OK, well, let him have a go. Let him try and negotiate all of that. But in the meantime, I need to keep my foot, as it were, on the Prime Minister's neck. I need to vote UKIP purely to put pressure on him. That is a completely logical and reasonable thing to do, isn't it?
Well, it isn't, because what we need in Europe is a strong Conservative Prime Minister, backed by a team of strong Conservative MEPs, members of the European Parliament in Brussels and Strasbourg, that then will be taken seriously by our European partners. The problem with sending Labour and Liberal Democrat MEPs is they don't want any change. The problem with sending UKIP MEPs is they often don't turn up. As I've just explained, they then vote the wrong way on things like the budget. And they're not taken seriously by other countries and the European Commission. So if you want change, you need to vote for the change. And I've got this clear plan for change that I believe I can deliver.
Talking about change and power, if you decided that the Pfizer bid for AstraZeneca was not in the interests of this country, could you stop it?
Well, first of all, I would speak out very clearly. I mean, I think the right thing to do is to engage early on, get stuck in with these companies, as I've done and my team of ministers have done, to make sure we get good guarantees and the best deal for Britain.
Which you haven't yet.
Well, I think we made some very good progress. I mean, I think, frankly, Andrew, it's been instructive how different politicians have reacted. As soon as I heard this was happening, I asked the Cabinet Secretary, other ministers, to engage with AstraZeneca and to engage with Pfizer. And the list of things Pfizer have already said they would do.
You engaged more closely with Pfizer.
Absolutely.
And includes some ex-friends of yours who are working for Pfizer than with AstraZeneca.
That's not the case. Ministers were talking to AstraZeneca before anyone spoke to Pfizer, so that is not the case.
Okay.
But, you know, look, don't underestimate the power of some of the things they've already said about making sure, for instance, 20% of their R&D jobs will be here in the UK.
You remember what
Now, I want more.
said
Absolutely, I want more. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that the Labour leader's reaction on being asked to engage with Pfizer was to say, no, I'm too busy, because he wanted, it's very important this, he wanted to stand on the sidelines and make a series of point-scoring political points rather than engaging in the national interest.
He's against the bid, and a lot of people looking at Pfizer's record will say, and a good thing too, they are a praying mantis. They will dismantle this company, which is very, very important to Britain. As Prime Minister, you ought to be able to stop it. You can't stop it because you haven't got a public interest defence at the moment. Can you put one in? Why not put one in?
Well, we are looking, the Business Secretary said specifically he's looking at this issue of public interest defence, and he will report back to Parliament on that.
But are you open-minded to toughening up the law on this?
I will do whatever is right for Britain. I will always stand up for British jobs, British interests, British science, British R&D. But when we think of that, it is important to make this point, which is Britain benefits massively by being an economy that is open to overseas investment. I mean, think of Jaguar Land Rover, bought by the Indians. Jaguar Land Rover has created 9,000 jobs in the West Midlands since I've been Prime Minister. Think of companies like AstraZeneca that have benefited massively by being able to go into other countries and invest and take over and run businesses. So don't think there is some kind of put up the drawbridge, pull up the
Still on the subject of efficiency and so forth, there have been proposals, including from Boris Johnson, for a change in the law on public sector strikes to raise the bar for the number of people actually voting. Is this something that you're attracted by and will do something about?
Yes, I think in these essential services like the London Underground, the pain caused to people trying to get to work and trying to help their families by these strikes, which are often supported by a relatively small percentage of the people who work for London Underground, I think hugely damaging. And so I think the time has come for setting thresholds in strike ballots in essential services. It's not something I can achieve in a coalition government.
Something for your manifesto.
It is something that will be in our manifesto.
Very good. Now, there's been a huge row this morning in the papers between Michael Gove and his Liberal Democrat colleagues over free school budgets and so forth. Is this a serious matter? Is the coalition going through a really, really bad four-year itch now? That's what it looks like.
The coalition works well at delivering the long-term economic plan, the changes that I've spoken about this morning. And on education, I'm happy to be judged on the record of what we have done. 250,000 fewer children in failing schools, more qualified, highly qualified teachers going into our schools, a real war on raising standards and attainment that you can see right across the pitch. On the specific issue of this story, we're actually spending £5 billion on new school places. That's twice what Labour spent in the previous 4 years. And also these new free schools.
How do you feel about a senior cabinet minister dissing Mr Gove, one of your colleagues and friends?
You get this stuff in the papers, and the best thing to do in my job is to get on with actually delivering what matters, which is good schools for our children.
Right.
But let me make this point, because I think it's been lost, which is free schools are new schools in the state sector. And they're an excellent innovation. And two-thirds of the first free schools got good or excellent ratings from Ofsted, which is actually better than
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm afraid we have to move to the news now.